Hello, my name is Ted Kirscher. I want to welcome you to this seminar on expanding your business in Europe. I'm with Landrum Human Resource Companies, and this seminar is brought to you by Landrum Europe. Landrum Europe is a member of the Landrum family of human resource companies. We're a 43-year-old human resource company, corporate headquarters in Pensacola, Florida. And we have with us today Mark DeVries, who's going to join us today. Mark, welcome.
Hi, Ted. Thanks for being here.
Yep, thank you. Mark, why don't we start by having you talk a little bit about yourself?
I lived for a while in America, worked there, did international business development, was sent to Russia, run an operation there for a while, came back home, and last 15 years have been working with US companies going to the European market. Over the last 15 years, we helped successfully 150 US companies into the European market, and currently we're working with 53 companies that we help with growing their business, growing their sales, hiring their European staff, being compliant with European law, and mergers and acquisitions in the European market, basically to do business development for them on the European side.
Mm-hmm. And that's your role with Landrum Europe?
That's my role with Landrum Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
Helping the people you're working with being successful in Europe.
Yeah, terrific. Well, let's go over some of the items that we're going to cover in our webinar today, so you can be familiar with our outline. We're going to be talking first about new approaches to international business development. We'll then move into why exporting companies are more successful than other companies, what the current trends in exporting are. We'll of course cover the barriers to exporting, talk about entry stages and strategies and best practices. We would invite you to send your questions to us, questions@landrumhr.com. If you'll email your questions to us, then we'll answer them at the conclusion of our webinar. Mark, we're going to be talking about some data that you and your firm have developed about Europe, but it's data specific to a particular group of companies, isn't it?
It's important that we put our discussion in a context. The context today, and that's the remarks I'll make, but also the data I'll present, is for small, medium-sized US companies that are active or want to go to the European market that sell added value products. So we're not talking about commodities now, it's an added value product where application engineering is important, high-end consumer products. So if we make remarks, please keep in mind it's in that context.
Mm-hmm. So you've worked, you described for us a little bit your extensive experience in working with American companies exporting to Europe. I know you've learned some things, and you've got some rules about those things that you've learned. So talk to us a little bit about some of the things you've learned.
Yeah, and Ted, to be open, over the last 15 years, what we could do wrong, we've done wrong in the past, and but we try to avoid it doing it a second time. And we always get to a 75% rule, and keep that in mind that 75% of the market for US companies is outside of the US. Mm-hmm. So there's a major reason to cross that border and go to Europe. But Europe is the single most important market for US companies abroad. But a lot goes wrong there. 75% of the US companies entering the European market go back home within 2 years. 75% of the product launches go wrong. 75% of the acquisitions don't live up to the expectations. Mm-hmm. 75% of the hires go wrong. And now we're talking about this, you're wondering why should I do this seminar, because it's pretty risky business. It is true, but today, and that's the objective of this seminar, to help people become part of that 25%.
Exactly.
That are successful, because it really pays off. And if you look at exporters that are successful, they gain a lot by doing that. And if you compare exporting companies versus companies that are active in the same market, in the same site, that are not exporting, you see some significant businesses.
So exporting is more successful, is really what you're...
It makes companies more successful, and not only on the export side, but it makes them really more successful internally as well. You do see that exporting companies have more sales growth in the market. You do see that exporting companies have more jobs. They create more jobs than companies that are not exporting. Exporting companies, if you look at the salary, they tend to pay people more than companies that are not exporting. you see that companies that are exporting have more product development. Maybe they have to develop products for the foreign market. But guess what? If you're walking around in a foreign market, you're competing there, you learn stuff as well that you bring back home.
Yep.
And if you then look at exporting companies, they are more competitive in their home market. One of the most important reasons for me to talk with companies about exporting is that exporting companies attract better talent. Recent research showed that talent likes to work for exporting companies. Can you imagine that you get more talent on board? And it's basically because when you're exporting, you're considered to be sexy at the moment.
Right.
Now, that all leads to a bottom line, of course. And let's look to a graph that I brought today about exporting companies, that over a period of 5 years, exporting companies have 37% more revenue growth compared to non-exporting companies. So there's a lot to be in that 25% and be successful.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Well, let's talk specifically about Florida. We've got some information about Florida exports that I think are significant. And if you look at, we've got a graph for you about the graph from Florida to the European Union. What strikes me about this graph is that you see the increase in revenue over time. That even in spite of the recession, that we've seen significant growth in the market to Europe from Florida. And interestingly enough, while we've seen this fairly significant increase in growth to Europe, you've seen a decline in growth to other parts of the world. So it just really goes to solidify why Europe is so important. It's important to U.S. exporting companies and very important to Florida exporting companies as well. I would remind you again about our questions. If you'd like to send us a question, it's questions@landrumhr.com, and we'll try to answer them for you. Let's move on and talk about barriers and trade barriers in particular. We've got some perceived barriers, some real barriers, and then some research-related barriers. Let's talk about some of these perceived barriers, Mark.
If you ask U.S. international sales manager, business development managers about the barriers that they find in doing their business, their number one barrier is saying, I cannot find the right partner in my export market. That's the number one barrier. Number two is payment risks. How do I handle payment risk? Number three, law, governmental regulations. Number four, barriers for entering a market. And number five is market intelligence. And I've been reviewing that. And if you look at that a bit more closer, and then we got the feeling like, in my opinion, they're basically lame excuses for not competent export managers.
Right.
Because if you look at the number one, I cannot find the right partner in my export market. Yeah, please go home, do your homework, find the right partner, and convince that partner. If we talk about payment risk, you have a payment risk when you didn't select the right partner.
That's right.
And even there are a lot of other tools to handle payment risk. So it's not an excuse. Governmental regulations. Yeah, we all have to handle governmental regulations. There's no way out.
I think we have one or two of those in the U.S., I think.
And Ted, really, please don't whine. Do your job right. And you end up at 25% instead of that 75% whining about exporting.
Right.
So that is a little bit our perception about this.
But there are some real barriers, though. There are some real concerns that one should have, right?
And there are some real concerns as well. And it's maybe good first to look at the reasons why companies go international and do that international business development. And then their motivation can be separated in two groups, proactive and reactive. And the proactive groups, why do we export? What do you think is the number one, why do we export?
Oh, that's probably for money.
Money. And that's interesting. Research has shown it's managerial urge. Interesting. What is managerial urge? But it turns out that companies and management of companies, they reach a point where they say, I need to go abroad. And you cannot really measure that. It's personal desire from the management team. So the number one is managerial urge. Of course, you're at the number two. It's earning more. The number three, I got unique products. Number four, very important for our market segment, is economical skill. in manufacturing, because we're not doing 1-2s, we're not doing zillions, we're in that middle market segment. And there it is important that you have a good skill. Also on the buying power side, be competitive there. And risk diversification is very important. To get back to your question, so far we talked about perception. If you start measuring barriers, and then academically, what are real barriers and not lame excuses?
You're right.
The number one is classic, culture and languages. Research shown is that what is a real barrier, culture and languages, and you have to take that in consideration if you go into that market. Communicating. It has to do a little bit with languages, but communicating is be able to communicate with them. It's about time zone and how do we talk.
Right. Just the basics, yeah.
Just practically be able to talk with them and know how. Of course, know-how is an issue. I don't know what to do. And that's something you have to work on. If you're a company, work on your know-how so you are able to find that right partner. Now, of course, exchange rates are important. But if you look to the market that we currently talk about, the European market, and of course last year there was a lot of information about Greece going bankrupt and Portugal and Spain would be next in line.
Right.
Practically, when the euro started, the exchange rate was 131. Guess what it is at the moment? 130, 131.
Right.
So I do think that we got past that point, and the exchange rate with Europe is pretty stable. And number 5 that research has shown is logistics. That you need to work out logistics, and nowadays we talk about supply chain management.
Right.
But it's something to take care of as well. The good news here is in the segments that we're active in, logistics is normally not a big issue.
Right.
The big issue is get the sales in.
Right,
because
exactly.
when you get the sales, you'll solve the logistic part. We're shipping oil rigs from here to Europe. Don't worry about your product. We'll find a way to get it over efficiently.
Exactly right. Exactly right. All right. So we've moved on here. We've made a decision that we want to enter a market. There are some really classic ways classic entry strategies to look at. So let's talk about those a bit.
Okay. Again, from the perspective of the companies we worked for, there are different market entry strategies, and there are also different ways to get to a market entry strategy. One of the books that I advise people to look at one day is Root. Franklin Root is a book that we run into ourselves. A couple of years ago I started reading, and reading that book I'm finding that, whoa, that guy got inside information. He really knows what he's doing. And funny enough, going back in the book, looking at the dates, the guy published his book 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So one thing to say about do your homework, learn a bit because it works.
Exactly.
You can avoid a lot of issues there.
Exactly.
But I use his model. It's a pretty simple model. And we take it step for step, and I'll talk you through it. But keep in mind that it's a model that is not one way. It's different steps that you take every step. And you take 2 steps forward, 3 steps backward. And continuously you are improving and changing your market entry strategy depending on the market developments, and also depending on your own organization.
Right. So we've got a graph, don't we, to show you how to walk through that strategy?
Let's first look at the graph, and we'll go through it step by step right now. And before I start with the first step, it's called export readiness assessment. If you go into a market, it's important that you first find out how does your organization look? Is your company ready to export? Of course, what you can do is go into a market and do a great market research and come up with a great strategy. But if your company is not ready for it, it won't work.
Right.
So step 1 is to look into your organization, find out what stage it is, and then and you can do that by doing a simple assessment. At our company, we have a questionnaire where you can do that assessment with your company. You can do by the export manager. You can have several people doing that. And if you do that and you send it back to us, we will help you with looking into it, and I can give you a clear feedback on where your organization is. And later on, we will discuss it, and probably will tell people where they can get that assessment.
Exactly.
So that's internally. of course, you have to look into the market as well, doing the classic market research, finding out where is the market, how large is the market, what is your competition doing, what kind of distribution channels are they using. And if you put them both together, you have your export readiness assessment. The second step would be the classification of where you're in right now.
Yeah, what kind of exporter are you?
What kind of exporter are you? And we looked at 3 or 4 different stages of exporting. Let's first go to the first stage, the reactive exporter. If you are a reactive exporter, you focus totally on the domestic market. And if you get a call, you don't even, from a foreign country, you don't even pick up and you don't even send information. So if you're in this stage, stay home, spend your money, go play golf. You get probably more fun out of that one than doing exports.
Right.
If you are an exporter, that would be the next stage. You're involved in exporting and only by filling unsolicited orders. You have unfavorable expectations of the export market and your organization is not set up to export. If you're in that stage, it's maybe good to do marketing management and realize together with your company, what do we want to do? Where do we want to be? And do your marketing strategy. If you step up and you become an experimental exporter, you're active in gathering export-related information. You're favorable of exporting and you have some exporting experience. And management has a desire to do more exporting. When you're in that stage, it's time to do market research. Focus of market research, because probably it's a barrier right now not having the right information. And by gathering that information, you will be able to make that next step. Now, of course, you can be an export, an expert, an active exporter. Then 10% of your export is 10% of your output is already to foreign countries. You have experience in several markets, and important is that you have also a product with added value. Now, if you are having this profile, it is time to work on your organizational goals and structures. You have to work on your organization, make them ready for that next leap into exporting. So I would like to people that are looking at this webinar today, think about on which stage they are, and hopefully they realize now what the next step should be to remove that barrier and be successful with exporting.
Yeah. Well, one piece of our model was about setting objectives and goals as that relates to exporting in particular. Talk to us a little bit, maybe give us some examples of appropriate goals and objectives.
Yeah, of course, we all know about setting goals and we can use SMART for doing that. I won't bother you with that today. If you want to know, it's just 2 Googles away and you're probably using it yourself.
Right.
It's maybe good to be more practical on setting goals. And I just gathered some data for you that you can use setting your goals. Now, it takes 2 years to reach break-even point. If you do planning with quicker break-even point, wishful thinking, it will take at least 2 years. It will take a year to develop an OEM. It takes a year to get a distributor going. Those guys, they don't run from month 1. It takes time to build that relationship. If you want to hire someone, to hire an inside salesperson to raise your service and support levels in the European market, it costs you about $50,000. And of course, they don't get that salary, but you have to take into account between 10, 20, 40% social taxes and insurances. If you want to hire a sales manager in Europe, that adds up to $105,000. And if you want to hire an international business development manager, it adds up to $145,000. This is what you pay. And if you pay less, I think you say in American, with peanuts you catch monkeys. This is the way it is right now. The same in Europe. Good people are hard to find, and you have to pay them the right salary to do the job right. Some other numbers you can use. If you have a rep in Europe, normally we don't have reps, but they use a 5 to 10%. If you work through distributors, go indirect, you talk about 35%. That's what you need to put in your budget, and that's what they need to sell your product on the market. And if you're looking at shipping, to ship a product with added value from the US to Europe, the rule of thumb is 5%. If you warehouse, you have to think about a 3% extra, so it adds up to an 8% in Europe. And if you are in Europe for 2 years and you are successful, probably your European operation costs 10% of your total sales in Europe. And what I'm giving you now is numbers that are not conservative. This is a good case scenario.
Gotcha. Okay. Very good. Let's talk about entry. There are a lot of different ways that one could enter the European market. Let's kind of run through those, the number of avenues you have to enter the European market.
Now, and we'll focus on our target audience and probably the 5 and handle the 5 most used entry modes for them. Where the number 1 is direct, going into that market, where practically it's a B2B. You call on your customer in Europe. It's ease of access. It's easy to do. You go in first instance pretty quick to the market. The costs are medium because you have to travel. It's not an inexpensive way. You have some advantages here. With products with added value, by going direct, you don't lose 35% of your distributor.
Right.
But more important is you can carry over your knowledge, your experience, your application experience, you can sell direct more expertly than having someone in the middle. And that's a big advantage of going direct into the market. A second option, it exists, it's agents and reps. Going in Europe. If you are really a good salesperson in the European market, you probably find a great job with a guaranteed salary, with a great big car at a distributor. If not, you may be not Mr. Right or Mr. Perfect and end up in that rep market. And of course, it's generalization, but in general, that's the case. And a lot of markets don't even have reps that can take you to the market. So reps are normally not a great option to really have full market coverage into the European market. Now, a very well-known option is, of course, the distributor. And if you look back 50 years ago, distributors did all the work.
Probably the most common, right?
We only had a telex, and we couldn't communicate, so you needed a partner in a market that did all the work, that did all the shows. Historically, we have seen that those distributors became order takers in Europe, and they got less added value, and they almost became logistic companies. We do see a little comeback of those distributors. Some distributors started focusing again, adding value, and it's definitely something that we see as a trend in the future. That I do think distributors are getting more added value at this point. The next mode is the greenfield operation. Terminology, what does greenfield means? You set up your own company, you hire a person, you hire an inside sales, you put a little office in place, and you grow that organization. Of course, it takes time to do that, but you have a lot of control. That's the advantage of a greenfield organization. And of course, you can make that acquisition. And that's the final one I like to handle. And we're not talking here about platform acquisitions, is the terminology now. We talk about add-on acquisitions, where you strategically buy a small company in the market that can raise your service levels, have people in place, has administration in place. And right now, there's a large group of companies with owners that have no one to fill in their shoes, I think is the American expression.
Yes.
That you can acquire, and you acquire right away a nice warehouse, a nice secondary operation, a nice system in place. And there are some opportunities where for not too much money, you can have a good start in the European market.
That's terrific, Mark. Well, we've seen, with your extensive international business experience, you've seen things kind of evolve. There's been kind of an evolution that takes place. And I think it's fascinating when you look at what the expectation of American companies when they first enter the market, and then if you look back 5 years later at the evolution and change that's taken place with that group. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and evolution takes place. Also, we had our evolution, and I can tell you whatever could be done wrong, we have done wrong in the past by helping those companies to the US, and I like to apologize for those companies that had to suffer because of that. But right now, our objective is not to make mistakes twice,
right,
and use that experience to help
absolutely.
Other US companies straight into that market.
Absolutely.
If you look at the number one opportunity that American companies, the number one way that they use to go into the European market is hiring people. And if you look at the evolution, how do they hire first and how do they hire later on? The first hire is always an opportunity. You know, at the show, they run into a sales guy that was just fired in England because he has to speak English, otherwise the communication is not that good, and they hire that person. They put them right away in the 75% group. That goes wrong.
Right.
The guy was fired for a reason. On top of that, you didn't have strategy in place. And what we do see later on, 5 years later, the number one way to go into a market is still hiring someone in that market. But they hire differently. They hire now the person that is supporting the market entry strategy. They maybe don't hire a sales guy, but they hire a sales engineer.
Right.
They maybe don't hire a sales guy, but they hire a channel manager, someone that can put different distribution channels next to each other. They don't hire people just by sending them a check, but they hire people and be in compliance, be professional on that. So that's a development that we have seen through the years, and that's what American companies changed in their strategy after 5 years.
Yep.
You see alliances with distributor. When they enter the market, they lean a lot on distributors. They totally lean on distributors. Why? They don't have the capability to guide them, to support them, to help them. We do see that at a later stage, where distributors first had a dominant role, later it becomes less. After 5 years, they're working less with distributors. And they found other ways to go into that market, and more successful ways. And that gets to direct export solutions. So they take it from back home, but they get at home the right people with the right qualifications, and they start doing direct export to those companies again. And important there is that your internal organization is well organized and it has the right system, people and organization in place to do that. What very important is, if you compare the first year against 5 years later, is that in the first period, they don't work a lot with subsidiaries and sales office. And it's maybe good to explain the difference between a subsidiary and sales office. A sales office is a foreign office managed by US ownership. So it's directly managed from the US. A subsidiary is independent. And what do we see? In the first time American companies go to the market, subsidiaries are not used a lot, but after 5 years they use subsidiaries, independent organizations. Why? If you have a subsidiary and think back about what are the main reasons we're not successful, language, culture, communications. If you have independent operating satellites there, it works. They are successful. And it's not always easy to do it from day one, and we don't advise that. And companies really have to go through a cycle to do that, but we'll help with that. But at the end of the day, if you want to be successful, this is probably where you end up.
Well, let's talk a little bit about new trends. As I said, I know you're extremely active. You're out there a lot in the international business world. What kind of trends are you seeing out there?
We talked about those distributors that are maybe having a comeback, but at least are getting more added value. That is important. We think the trend is focus on added value. Don't focus on your product. Also focus on the added value. Don't sell your product, but sell your DNA. Typical US companies have good DNA. They're known for their flexibility. They're known for their quality. They're known for that yes we can attitude. That's all DNA. Sell your DNA, start that relationship. A big trend is, and I don't know how it is in the US, but in Europe all the politicians are screaming brick here, brick there. Go to Brazil, go to Russia, go to India. If we look at the experience of companies, that's not where your bread and butter is right now. Go to proven markets where you have proven products, where you can be successful. The other markets, it will take many years before you're really successful. And it's supported by the numbers from the Department of Commerce, not a lot of companies are successful in those countries. So the trend we see, people are moving a bit back from brick and going back to the classic markets where they are successful. There's one more development that we see, search engine advertisement, where maybe a couple of years ago we walked away from social media, from Google search engine advertisement, where we do see nowadays, again, if you're in that niche active, you can gain a lot and you can generate a lot of leads. And we advise companies to pay attention to that right now. And we help them with setting themselves up for that type of business and having the right translations. So when people Google in German, that they also end up on the right side. But it's also about infrastructure. If you are found by a US company and they want to have information, they have 75% chance that they will send an email to you. And could you send me more information, or can you quote me on this or that? Where in Europe, we have a different attitude. That if we find a company, we want to get in contact with them, in 75% of the cases, we'll pick up the phone. So also keep in mind that you need to have an organization in place that is able to handle that communication. And if they call at 3 o'clock to the US and no one picks up the phone, they make the next call. That's not you.
Right.
So,
right, exactly.
So that's a little bit the trends that we see at the moment.
Okay. Well, there's an old saying. I know this is you have a little saying that you like to use. We in the U.S. we say think locally, act globally.
Yeah, think global, act local.
Yeah.
We heard about that.
Yeah.
We have a feeling about that. And think global. For this group of people we're talking and addressing to today, don't think, do global. You miss 75% of your market, and make sure that it also represents your sales figures. If you only have 10% of your sales in outside of the America, you know there's a lot to get. So do it. Secondly, act local. And research has proven that I don't even understand my own wife. Let's face it, So don't try to act like a French person, or don't try to act like a German purchasing woman. We can't do that. We don't speak the languages. Trust yourself. Trust your DNA. Be open. Be transparent. Because our experience is, if you have that approach to the market, don't worry. If you got a good product, they'll trust you and they'll work with you, even when you don't handle the business card the right way. Right.
Very good. Well, we've been asking you to send your questions to us, questions at landrumhr.com. We have one question that's come in already. The question is, will the slide presentation be available after the webinar? Actually, we'll take you one step better. The entire webinar will be available after the webinar. We'll archive this webinar. We can send links out to you for it. Landrum Companies has a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Landrum Companies, where all of our past webinars are available, and certainly we'll be placing this webinar on there as well. If you, for some reason, would like to see the particular slide deck, if you'll just send us a note at questions@landrumhr.com, we'll be happy to forward the actual slides to you. Well, Mark, we've talked a lot about barriers, about strategies, about assessments. And that's really, I want to make sure that our viewers understand that that's what Landrum Europe is there for, that we're there to help with the market research, to help with the business development, and really the full gamut of issues that we've covered today. Landrum Europe has a solution to those issues.
Yeah, and of course we talked today in generalisms. But every case is different. Every case is and it can be because of the product or the focus or the market. And if you're in a situation where you say, I like to develop my European activities, or I want to start in Europe, give us a call. We have that experience with working with those US companies, and we're more than willing to share it, and just challenge us. We're more than willing to visit you, fill out a form, give us a call. We'll visit you and we talk about your European challenges, and I'm almost sure we can solve a lot of them by just with a good conversation, a bit of trust.
Absolutely. Yeah, we invite you to look at on our website at landrumhr.com/Europe. You'll see information out there about our European offerings. If you wanted to, Mark mentioned the questionnaire earlier in the webinar. If you'll just send us your request at questions@landrumhr.com, we'll be happy to forward that tool on to you and let you answer those questions for you. And again, I really want to stress that I know Landrum, we're a 43-year-old human resources company. The human resource offerings is clearly a part of what we're talking about here. But Landrum Europe can also assist with, as I said earlier, the business development side of things. Simple things like how you might lease a car in Europe isn't quite so simple for a U.S. company. And we've got the ability through Landrum Europe to take care of leased car arrangements, cell phone contracts, any number of details that as an American company we sort of take for granted, but it's not quite that easy in the European market for an American company to go in there and sign a contract to lease a car.
Yeah, and the other way around as well.
Yep.
That practically, if I walk into a bank here in the US right now and say I'd like to have a bank account, they ask for a social security number.
Right.
And I'm like, what is a social security number? And it's small stuff.
Yeah.
But the good thing is that over the years, American companies have been successful in Europe. And there's a lot of information available, and that's the know.
Exactly.
And a lot of knows 2 Googles away. Now, look for the how, and we can do a lot in that how area for you. And we have great stories and great examples, and we even get you in touch with companies that have done it and successfully have proven that it's possible. And use us. Yep. Give us a call. We're in this area, and if we're not in the area, we'll find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mark, thanks so much for being with us. It's been a terrific webinar. You've really given us a lot of great information about exporting and taking our business to Europe, and appreciate you being here very much. Thank you for tuning in and being with us. Again, we'd invite you to contact us at landrumhr.com/Europe. Contact us through the email address questions@landrumhr.com. And thank you very much for tuning in.